Welcome to the Snoring Historian, where the stories are true, the jokes are dry, and the goal is simple. Help you drift off while learning about people who absolutely did not die peacefully in their sleep. Tonight's tale is a big one, an epic that's been growing like a medieval group chat for over 1,000 years. It involves magical swords, morally questionable wizards, emotionally unavailable knights, and so many betrayals it makes reality TV look emotionally stable. Yes, we're talking about King Arthur, the man, the myth, the merchandising opportunity. So grab your goblet of chamomile tea, adjust your tunic, fluff your feather pillow, and settle in for a tale that historians can't confirm, poets can't stop rewriting, and no two sources ever seem to agree on. And if you haven't already, give that like button a gentle Grail-worthy tap, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell like it's the hilt of Excalibur. Now, let's dim the torches and begin at the uncertain, swampy beginnings of Britain's most legendary, maybe king. Let's start with the obvious question. Was King Arthur real? Well, that depends. Are you asking if he existed, or if he existed while also being handed a magical sword by a soggy woman in a lake? Because those are two very different things. The earliest records we have of anyone Arthur adjacent go back to the 5th or 6th century. Post-Roman Britain was a bit of a mess. Think warlords with bad tempers, Saxons crashing the party, and zero functioning postal service. Rome had pulled out, the infrastructure was collapsing, and suddenly everyone remembered they hated each other. In this chaos, a few vague figures begin to emerge from the fog. Ambrosius Aurelianus, possibly a real Romano-British leader. Riothamus, a shadowy king who led troops into Gaul. And then there's Arturus, a name that appears in fragmented Welsh poetry and battle lists with all the historical rigor of a pub trivia night. None of them wield a magical sword. None are known for round tables. And certainly none come with a wizard attached. So already, the disappointment is palpable. Then along comes Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century. Geoffrey was a Welsh cleric who looked at Britain's scattered folklore and said, "Yeah, I can work with this." And by work with this, I mean he wrote an entire book, The History of the Kings of Britain, that was roughly 80% imagination and 20% rumors he probably overheard in taverns. This is where Arthur gets a glow-up. Geoffrey made him a king. The king. He gave him a full family, a wizard named Merlin, and a reputation for conquering not just Britain, but Ireland, Iceland, Norway, Gaul, and just for fun, threatening to take on the Roman Empire. Because why stop at managing a rocky island nation when you can also intimidate Caesar? Geoffrey's version had drama, it had flair, it had dragons and disguised paternity, and the kind of over-the-top character arcs that would make HBO weep with envy. Suddenly, Arthur wasn't just some local war leader, he was an international power player, a medieval megastar. One of Geoffrey's biggest narrative choices was introducing Uther Pendragon, Arthur's father. In one of the more questionable parenting origin stories in literature, Uther lusts after Igraine, the Duchess of Cornwall. When diplomacy fails, Merlin helps Uther disguise himself as Igraine's husband so he can sneak into her bed. 9 months later, boom, baby Arthur. That's right, Britain's greatest mythical king was conceived via magical catfishing. Merlin, by the way, is a mashup of several Welsh figures, most notably Myrddin Wyllt, a wild man of the woods who talked to animals and went mad after a battle. Geoffrey decided that wasn't quite mysterious enough, so he merged Myrddin with the Roman prophet Ambrosius and gave us Merlin. part wizard, part prophet, part ominous exposition machine. And from here, the legend took off. Once Geoffrey's version of Arthur hit the medieval literary scene, things snowballed fast. Other writers took his gloriously over-the-top ideas and said, what if we added even more horses and heartbreak? The French were especially enthusiastic about this. In the 12th century, a poet named Chrétien de Troyes entered the chat, and when the French enter any chat, things get complicated and emotional almost immediately. Chrétien introduced a knight named Lancelot, or as he's better known today, Sir Hotmess of Love Triangle. Lancelot was noble, brave, deeply loyal to Arthur, and also head over heels in love with Arthur's wife, Guinevere. Guinevere, for her part, returned the affection. Loudly, repeatedly, and mostly behind Arthur's back. What followed was less of a love triangle and more of a medieval soap opera. This relationship had the dramatic tension of an opera, the quiet suffering of an indie film, and the zero consequences of a sitcom. Arthur, meanwhile, seemed either oblivious or in deep denial, possibly because confronting your best friend and your queen about their extremely unsubtle affair is not high on the kingly to-do list. But Chrétien didn't stop with forbidden love. He also introduced the Holy Grail. In his poem Percival, The Story of the Grail, we meet a young knight who visits a mysterious castle and witnesses a strange procession, a bleeding lance, a candelabra, and a golden grail. It's weird, it's mystical, it's never really explained. Later writers, clearly uncomfortable with ambiguity, took this imagery and decided, ah yes, this must be the cup of Christ. Thus, the Holy Grail went from unexplained symbolic MacGuffin to the most sacred relic in Christendom. It was now the cup from the Last Supper, the same one that caught Jesus' blood at the crucifixion, and according to some, had the power to grant eternal life, perfect wisdom, or at the very least, a solid book deal. And with that, the Arthurian saga took a sharp turn toward religious allegory. In came knights like Percival, Galahad, and Bors, each setting out on a quest for the Grail. But this wasn't just any quest. This was a spiritual journey, a test of purity, faith, and virtue, which naturally disqualified about 90% of the existing cast. Galahad, the love child of Lancelot and Elaine, who, depending on the story, tricked Lancelot into thinking she was Guinevere, medieval dating was complicated, was the ultimate golden boy. He was so pure, so perfect, and so completely free of emotional baggage that he basically ascended to heaven the moment he laid eyes on the Grail. Percival, sweet and naive, came close. He even got to ask the right question in some versions. Whom does the Grail serve? Spoiler, the answer was never the plot. Meanwhile, Sir Bors, with a name that sounds like a belch and a resume full of responsible decisions, also got to glimpse the Grail, mostly by not dying, cheating, or flirting with married women. The bar was low, but someone had to clear it. This shift in tone, from swashbuckling adventure to spiritual reflection, didn't kill the Arthurian myth. It deepened it. Suddenly, these weren't just stories of knights clanging swords. They were stories about what it meant to be good, truly good, and how often the people who want power are the least equipped to wield it. Meanwhile, Arthur himself began to fade into the background. In many Grail stories, he's more of a set piece, the king who waits at court while his knights go off on their holy fetch quests. Camelot becomes a kind of narrative home base, a place to return to after spiritual failure or victory. But the seeds of Camelot's undoing were already sown. Let's start with the blade that may or may not have started it all, Excalibur. Here's the thing most casual fans don't know. Excalibur is not the same sword as the one pulled from the stone. That sword, depending on the version you read, breaks. It's like the tutorial weapon in a video game. Impressive at first, but doomed to snap the moment you face a mini-boss. The real prize comes later, when Arthur receives a new sword, Excalibur, from the Lady of the Lake. She rises from the water, arm draped in white silk, offering the weapon like she's auditioning for a shampoo commercial with weaponized props. This scene is so dramatic that later retellings added even more sparkle to it. In some versions, the lake is enchanted. In others, the sword glows or sings. And in some, presumably the ones with higher special effects budgets, the lady disappears beneath the water with a splash and a mysterious smile. Because nothing says divine authority like a magical aquatic arms dealer. Excalibur wasn't just shiny, it was legendary, said to be unbreakable, able to blind enemies in battle. Some versions claim it had a scabbard that prevented the bearer from losing blood, making it the medieval equivalent of equipping auto-heal. But Excalibur also symbolized divine right. It wasn't enough to be strong. Arthur needed to be chosen. And nothing says chosen quite like a supernatural endorsement from a woman who lives in a lake. Then there's Camelot, which, believe it or not, wasn't part of the earliest tales. Geoffrey never mentioned it. It first shows up in 12th century French romances as Arthur's glittering capital city. Camelot is less of a place and more of an idea. It's the utopian court where justice reigns, chivalry thrives, and knights sit around a big table trying not to kill each other. It's perfect. Too perfect. Which means it's going to fall. Hard. The Round Table itself was a gift from Guinevere's father. Some versions say Merlin designed it. Its circular shape meant no one could claim precedence. Everyone was equal. Which sounds noble until you remember most of these knights were professional sword fighters with severe egos. The table had many seats, sometimes 12, sometimes 100 or more, depending on which author needed room for a new favorite knight. But one seat stood out, the Siege Perilous. Reserved for the knight destined to find the Holy Grail, anyone unworthy who sat in it would be instantly struck dead. Which raises questions about Arthurian workplace safety protocols. Some of the more notable Round Table knights include Sir Gawain, known for strength that waxed and waned with the sun, and for headbutting moral dilemmas like a medieval linebacker. Star of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, where he beheads a stranger at a Christmas party and then gets haunted by guilt and vegetation. Sir Bors. Yes, that's his real name. Despite it sounding like a sound you make after too much mead, he was one of the few knights to actually see the Grail and survive. He was also known for being unusually virtuous and monogamous, basically the designated driver of the Round Table. Sir Percival. Sweet, naive, and pure-hearted. In many versions, he's the original Grail Knight, but later stories pass the honor to Galahad. His character arc is 70% awe, 20% confusion, and 10% accidental wisdom. Sir Kay, Arthur's foster brother and official royal hype man. He's sarcastic, combative, and in many tales, deeply flawed, which is to say, more relatable than most of the others. Sir Tristan, famous for his tragic love story with Iseult or Isolde, which involved potions, misunderstandings, and more longing than an entire season of a period drama. Think Romeo and Juliet, but with armor and worse communication skills. And then there's Sir Galahad, the Mary Poppins of knights, practically perfect in every way. son of Lancelot, and a woman named Elaine, who tricked Lancelot into thinking she was Guinevere, because again, medieval courtship was a hot mess. Galahad had no romantic interests, no sins, and absolutely no chill. He found the Grail, got raptured, and never had to deal with the Round Table's HR department. Now, despite all this heroism and hope, the cracks in Camelot were always there. Guinevere and Lancelot's affair wasn't just gossip, it was the beginning of the end. The kingdom's ideals, loyalty, honesty, justice, began to unravel under the weight of human nature. Enter Mordred. Depending on the version, Mordred is Arthur's nephew, son, or both. Don't ask. There's sorcery and confusion, and definitely at least one very awkward family dinner. Mordred eventually seizes power while Arthur's away, leading to a brutal civil war. Father fights son. Kingdom fights itself. All the ideals of Camelot are tested and fail. In the climactic Battle of Camelot, Arthur and Mordred kill each other. Arthur is mortally wounded and taken to Avalon, a mystical island where he will supposedly rest until Britain needs him again. That line, "until Britain needs him again," became legend. Arthur wasn't just a king, he was a prophecy. Now, Arthur may have been gone, but the story was far from over. Like a particularly clingy ghost, the legend of Arthur kept reappearing, rebooted, reimagined, and occasionally wearing too much eyeliner. Let's fast forward to the 15th century. That's when Sir Thomas Malory wrote Le Morte d'Arthur, the first big English-language consolidation of the entire Arthurian saga. Malory was complicated. He was in and out of prison for theft, extortion, and possibly attempted murder, which makes him arguably the most on-brand Arthurian author. If you're going to write about knights committing passionate, ill-advised deeds, it helps if you have some first-hand experience. Malory's version of the story was darker, more tragic. His Arthur is a noble but doomed king, betrayed by those closest to him, undone by love, pride, and the frailty of human nature. It was Shakespearean before Shakespeare, and thanks to the advent of the printing press, Le Morte d'Arthur spread like wildfire. Arthur was now canon. For the next few centuries, the story simmered quietly, occasionally popping up in poems, paintings, and odd references. Then came the Victorians. The Victorians, masters of sentimentality and sexual repression. They loved Arthur. Lancelot became a romantic figure. Guinevere became a tragic heroine. The story, stripped of much of its medieval messiness, became a symbol of lost glory, of a better, nobler time that probably never existed, but sounded great in verse. Alfred Lord Tennyson, poet laureate and part-time daydreamer, published Idylls of the King in the 19th century. His Arthur was a Christ-like figure, his downfall an allegory for Britain's moral decline. Lancelot and Guinevere's affair was portrayed as deeply tragic, like two very sad porcelain dolls gently bumping into each other on a doily. Tennyson's work, combined with the arts and crafts movement's obsession with medieval aesthetics, led to a full-blown Camelot revival. Stained glass windows, tapestries, even wallpaper, all covered in moody knights and wistful queens. For a while, Arthur was less a king and more a vibe. Then came the 20th century, and with it, some new takes. First, there was T.H. White's The Once and Future King, published in parts between the 1930s and 1958. It starts as a whimsical retelling of Arthur's youth, with Merlin aging backward and turning Arthur into animals to teach him life lessons. But as the story progresses, it gets darker, more complex. The final book, The Candle in the Wind, is an aching meditation on failure, legacy, and how good intentions can be crushed under the weight of reality. White's version influenced everything, from Disney's The Sword in the Stone to the Broadway musical Camelot, which JFK's administration later used as political branding. Yes, really. The Kennedy White House deliberately leaned into Arthurian symbolism, a young, noble leader, a hopeful future. The irony of Camelot's eventual downfall was either lost on them or chillingly prophetic. Then came Monty Python. In 1975, Monty Python and the Holy Grail arrived and changed everything. Suddenly, Arthurian legend was funny, absurd, filled with coconut horse clops, argumentative peasants, knights who say, "Nigh," swinging a lightsaber, and a killer rabbit that made grown men scream. And the thing is, it worked. It didn't destroy the legend. It reinforced it. Because parody only lands when the source material is beloved. Arthur became accessible again, not just for scholars or poets, but for anyone who's ever enjoyed a weird, slightly irreverent bedtime story. Since then, Arthur's popped up in everything from fantasy novels to video games, from Excalibur, 1981, to King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, 2017, with budget but no plot, to Netflix's Cursed, where the Lady of the Lake gets her own origin story. Each generation rewrites Arthur. Sometimes he's noble, sometimes flawed. Sometimes he's a symbol of unity, or a warning of how dreams fall apart. Sometimes he's just a guy with a sword and a confusing family tree. But always he returns, because Arthur, real or not, stands for the idea that leadership can be just, that knights can strive for honor, that even in the middle of chaos, someone might try to do the right thing. And really, isn't that a story worth telling? That concludes tonight's tale from the Snoring Historian. If you enjoyed this epic journey through swords, scandals, and soggy ladies bearing cutlery, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share it with the wizard in your life. And remember, history is written by the victors, but it's usually embellished by poets, bards, and the occasional imprisoned knight with too much time on his hands. Until next time, sleep well, dream of dragons, and never sit in the siege perilous without divine clearance.